Good evening, my washers and dryers, and welcome back to The Laundromat, where we are talking about what I read in the month of May. For the month of May, I decided to participate in With Cindy's Asian Readathon, wherein she outlined 5 challenges for the month. So the first challenge is read a book by an Asian author. I have 6 to talk about today. The second was to read a book featuring a main character who is a woman or an older character. The third was to read a book in a universe you want to experience or a universe that is different from your own. Fourth challenge was read a book with a cover worthy of googly eyes in that the cover is very pretty. And 5, read a book that is highly rated and or highly recommended. There are some other things involved in there, like making sure that each of your book is from an author of a different ethnicity. And that's not to say that like this challenge and this whole month of reading is about meeting quotas or about anything like that. The big thing is about expanding what I typically read from. It's about being conscious of the books I choose and about experiencing other things. I ended up learning a lot this month, and I'm excited to talk about some of those things. So without further ado, let's get into what I read in the month of May. The first book I read in May was Breasts and Eggs by Mieko Kawakami. This is a literary novel about a woman who lives in Tokyo. The first part is about her sister coming to stay with her because her sister wants a breast augmentation surgery, and just kind of untangling the reasons why. Her sister also brings her daughter with her, and her daughter is, I think she's like 16 or 17. And we get passages from the daughter's journal where she's just livid at the very concept of growing up, of being a woman. And we get the main character Natsuko's feelings about how she looks, how she's perceived. And we carry that into the second part where Natsuko is now 38. We skip 8 years between part 1 and part 2. And Natsuko is contemplating the idea of growing old alone, of not having any kids, any partner, any kind of like stable family structure in her life and how that affects her. And she gets kind of swept up in stories about kids who are born via sperm donation and how that affects them, how it shapes the way they look at the world. So I am not a literary fiction kind of person. I loved this. This ended up being just a really weird book to read at the start of May with everything going down legislatively and just having to kind of have my own thoughts about womanhood, motherhood, existence thrown into like focus and reading about it from a different perspective of someone who's running out of time, so to speak. Because I'm 25, so I'm 5 years away from being the same age as Natsuko in the first part of the book. But to have those thoughts, kind of brought up again. And the emotional catharsis of the book is just so well handled. Like, I cried at the end. It was so well done. Definitely one of my new favorites. Probably a 9 out of 10 I would give it. I loved this one. I loved the way it was written, the way the prose is done. Mieko Kawakami does such a wonderful job of capturing the internal thoughts and the internal monologue of the characters. I'm not even going to call it feminist literature, but if you like books about being a woman that explore the concepts of being a woman, of having that experience, this one should definitely be in your library for that. It was so well done. Really enjoyed it. Started the month off strong, I'll say that much. Before I put this one down, Breasts and Eggs, written by Mieko Kawakami, was translated by Sam Bett and David Boyd from the Japanese. So I want to make sure that I credit translators if it's translated. So the next one, The Cabinet by Eunsu Kim, who is a Korean author, translated from the Korean by Sean Lynn Halbert. This is a weird little quick little book. I had a fun time with it. It's one part series of short stories, vignettes type deal, and on the other, it's like conspiracy thrillers. So it's about an office worker named Mr. Kong, and all he does is he handles like anomalies and weird situations. They have a cabinet that documents these situations, whether that be a guy who has a ginkgo tree growing from his pinky, or a guy who really wants to turn into a cat because the woman he loves is obsessed with cats and has no interest in romance whatsoever, and he thinks his best shot is to be a cat. It reminded me a lot, just in tone and feel, of The Metamorphosis by Kafka, where it's just kind of weird and you just gotta roll with it. But again, all of these weird scenarios that are isolated in these little chapters kind of come together to knit the fabric of the back half of the book, where it takes on kind of a Men in Black feel. It wasn't necessarily my favorite one of the month, but I did enjoy the way that he described these people who were just weird. The guy who has a ginkgo tree growing out of his pinky, he's like, it's just a tree. What am I supposed to do? I can't just rip it out. It's part of me now. So yeah, if you're a fan of The Metamorphosis, of really even Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I think kind of that weird sense of tone is present there as well. It was a fun little read. and kind of just one that I found out in the wild. I haven't seen anything about it, but I had a good time. It was fun. Next, I read A Magic Steeped in Poison by Judy, who is a Taiwanese author who has written this really neat fantasy where the magic system is based in tea. This is definitely my pick for beautiful cover. I adore all of the colors and the water. It's just a stunning piece of work. We follow Ning, who accidentally, maybe, poisoned her mom, and she decides that she's going to try and rectify those things, save her family, and go to the palace to learn to be kind of the magic tea user of the palace. And it's one of those classic tournament arcs where she has to survive the competition from everyone else while uncovering typical conspiracies. I had a good time with this one. It's a very straightforward novel, and one that I would definitely point out if you're like, how do I write young adult fantasy? This right here. It follows all of the beats pretty much perfectly, and all of the like twists and turns were about where I would expect them to happen. That's not to say that it's bad by any stretch. And it wasn't even that I wasn't surprised. I think it's just if you want to understand how the framework of a young adult fantasy works, this is definitely the way to go. I really enjoyed the world building in this one a lot. And that, I think, has been one of my big takeaways for this month, is I'm glad that Asian authors have an opportunity to create a fantasy setting that is based on their own mythology, on their own cultural understanding. Because I think with a lot of modern fantasy, some of it tends to blur together because it's the same European setting. So I'm really glad that we get kind of a Taiwanese-inspired setting, and I've got some others coming up that I'm really excited to talk about. So this one was fun. I'm very curious where it goes from here. After that, I read Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, which is a graphic novel following life in Iran before, during, and kind of after the Iranian Revolution. This is just the first one. There's a sequel, but I just read the first one, which focuses on Marjane when she was, I believe, 10 years old. I don't know a lot about the Iranian Revolution. I've read Reading Lolita in Tehran by Azar Nafisi, which is kind of a memoir about these women who used to be professors who now have lost their positions, but still want to meet and talk about literature because that's what they study, that's what they know. Where Persepolis it's subtitled The Story of a Childhood. And so it's these big, complex, messy political situations through the eyes of someone who looks at the world in a very simple black and white way of thinking. She manages to take, the breadth of these events and the scope of them and manage to fold them into a very approachable experience without sacrificing the complexity of the situation. And that's not to say complexity in the sense of like, the morals were complex. No, it was just a mess is what it was. But just kind of seeing the way the adults respond around her and the way she reflects on these situations as an adult was really insightful, and I think the American perception of the Iranian Revolution simplifies what happened. One of the first things that the book points out is that in 1953, the CIA, with the help of British intelligence, organized a coup against the then Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. Mossadegh was overthrown, and then the Shah was instated, who had earlier escaped from the country, and he returned to power, and the Shah stayed on the throne until 1979, when he fled to escape the revolution. If you want a beginner's look, if you're curious about that sort of thing, I think that's a good place to start. It is still heavy, but the illustrations are such that it's not overwhelming. So yeah, if you want to learn it, it's a really good first place to start. After that, I read Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, which fits with my featuring a main character who's a woman or an older character, and a highly rated book, because this is a Top 10 Best Books by the New York Times. It's a National Book Award finalist, highly, highly acclaimed, and with good reason. I loved this book. This book is almost 500 pages long, and I blew through it in, I think, a weekend, 4 days. It was a fast time. So Pachinko follows a Korean family who moves from Korea to Japan, and everything that they go through. Min Jin Lee managed to take a story about a single family spanning close to 70 years. We are able to make that so engaging, and it just flies by. It kind of bounces between certain perspectives. We get the perspective of Sunja, who is the matriarch of the family, her growing up, her meeting a man, getting pregnant by that man, and then realizing he had a family, and marrying someone else who offers to kind of take her into his life, and they share that existence following their sons, and the Pachinko business that they kind of get involved with, and their sons' children, and how that affects them. It is sweeping, it is beautifully written, and it was a real eye-opener. I knew that when Koreans moved to Japan, they had to take on a Japanese name, they had to kind of relinquish their Korean name. I didn't realize how deep Japanese colonialism ran in Korea. And so that was a huge eye-opener. It was such a rewarding experience to read a balance of hardship, a celebration of like life and triumph, and it was enough of a good read that I ended up buying Min Jin Lee's other book, Free Food for Millionaires, that I'm excited to get to. This one was also just fun to read because it has lots of lines that are given in Japanese but in Romaji, which means that all of the sounds are written out using English sounds, and I know some conversational, I'm not even gonna say some conversation, I know like 5 conversational Japanese phrases, and all others I would have to like, you know, lean my head around the corner to ask my husband, hey, what does this mean? And he could translate for me. So I'm just in awe of being able to make a single story about a single family spanning 70 years and almost 500 pages go by as quickly as it did. Oh, that's the other thing. I almost forgot the big thing I wanted to talk about. So this book is set between 1911 and 1989. And there's a very particular third-person omniscient narration that I associate with classic literature, you know, like 19th century literature, where we get the thoughts of everyone in a scene and we're not isolated in one head. And that's present in this book, where it's all written in third-person omniscient narration. So we get the thoughts of everyone, we get their perceptions and their reactions to things all at the same time. So it feels like a classic in the sense that it feels like it was written in the time it was set. And so this book is just begging to be studied on a deeper, richer level, and I really see myself rereading this. I think this is a great choice for a summer read. I associate summer with long reads, so if you need something very rewarding, very good, read this. I think you'd have a lot of fun with it. This is definitely my favorite of the month, possibly a favorite of the year. After that, I read Zachary and the Dragon Emperor by Xiran Zhao, who wrote one of my other favorite books, Iron Widow. This is a middle grade novel that I believe has been comped as Yu-Gi-Oh! Meets Percy Jackson, and that definitely comes through. This is so cool. So Zachary Ying is a 12-year-old Hui Chinese immigrant. He and his mom moved to America after his father was murdered by the CCP, and he is having a hard time fitting in. And one of the ways that he has fit in is through this game called Myth Realm, which is kind of a VR Age of Empires? I don't know exactly. The way I think of it is it works like the Fate Nasuverse kind of deal, where you can summon a mythic figure, and those mythic figures have powers, and that's how they function in the story. So he is bonded with the Dragon Emperor, with Qin Shi Huang, who was I believe considered the first emperor of Japan. He is bonded in a way to Qin Shi Huang, who was the first emperor of China, who unified the country. The only problem is the emperor is bonded to his VR headset, not to his brain. So he has access to it, but he doesn't understand it because he just doesn't know Chinese history. His mom never really had opportunity to tell him about any of it because she was too busy working, and he never really had any interest in it because he wanted to distance himself from that heritage. And so the course of the book is him learning about himself. He meets up with a couple other kids who are also bonded to Chinese emperors or other Chinese prominent figures, and they go on kind of a Percy Jackson fetch quest. They're trying to seal a portal before it can unleash demons and other assorted monsters. I had a lot of fun with this. I have definitely aged out of the demographic for it. This is just, it's middle grade, but it's well written middle grade. Xiran Zhao writes third person very well for this one. Which I think it's a temptation with a lot of like younger focused literature to write with a first person perspective. So I think they did a good job of making Zach still have a lot of personality, even if we're just doing it in third person. I am also a sucker for talking about mixed moralities, because you have these emperors who are like, conquer whatever. Your end goal is a strong unified empire. And there are moments where Zach is like, this sounds like supervillain speech. Am I on the right side here? I really like the way Xiran writes all of the emperors, figures from Chinese history, from Qin Shi Huang, maybe Qin Shi Huang. The way that they're presented, they have a lot of personality. They have kept up with the times because they're paired with this technology. So especially the emperor that Zach is bonded to has done his best to keep up to date with all of the memes. I also really liked, I think it's Li Bai, who is a poet. I like the way that Xiran Zhao wrote him. It has good pacing. It's always moving. It's always pushing to the next thing. And so just the pages flew by and I had a great time with it. Very curious to see where it goes from here. Looking forward to continuing to support them and their writing experience because they are phenomenal. It's fun to watch them succeed. There are some public figures where their successes are just annoying, but Xiran Zhao, I'm stoked for whatever they do next. And the last book I read in the month of May is Jade Fire Gold by Jun Ciel Tan, who is a Singaporean author. So this follows An and Altan, who are from different spheres but kind of collide into each other when their paths cross, and they go on a little adventure together. So this world has magic. People are able to use magic, but that magic is also suppressed because only a select class of people can use magic. Not to compare a Southeast Asian work to Avatar: The Last Airbender, but it gives me big Earth Kingdom vibes. So An comes from a poorer region in the nation, and she finds out that she is what is called a life stealer, someone who can suck the life force out of someone, and that kind of freaks her out. Altan, meanwhile, is a deposed royal who had to flee after there was just kind of a massive political upheaval within the palace, and he is trying to make his way back to either rightfully claim the throne or really just get revenge. You know, revenge is sometimes the highest priority. But they cross paths, they ally themselves together, and we just go on this very breakneck pace adventure to retrieve this sword and to right the wrongs that have gone on in the palace. So I found this one, I believe, through a video about queries, because the comp titles for this one, and I don't recall right off, but the pitch for this one was really engaging, and I had a great time with this. I really enjoyed the dual POV. So we get both An and Altan's perspectives in this book, and it didn't do my pet peeve. So when it comes to dual POVs, especially if it's first person dual POVs, I really just want it to be isolated to those two heads, because it is so tempting in like the last third of the book to throw in a single chapter who is from another perspective, and it's always a third person perspective, and it's from the person we didn't think was the villain this whole time, and this chapter reveals that they were the villain the whole time, and I'm just glad that wasn't there. And An and Altan were distinct enough as protagonists that I felt like I was getting a rich, full experience through both of their perspectives combined. The supporting cast was also really well done. I especially liked Taishin. As I was getting towards the end of this one, I was like, okay, it's like a standalone. You don't see those too often. And then we got an epilogue, and I'm like, okay, you know what? You got me there. I'll keep reading. Let's see what comes next. So no, I had a great time with this. This also flew by. I read it over the course of just a couple days once I sat down to read it. I'm also just a big fan of the cover. I'm a big fan of actual drawn covers and the spine. Like just the detailing that goes across there. It's a really stunning cover. And yeah, it's really cool. Those are the books that I read for Asian Readathon, and I think it's a very worthwhile challenge. Again, it's not about meeting quotas, it's about expanding your horizons. A lot of these books I've had sitting on my shelves for weeks, and this was just an opportunity to read them together and to get a dearth of perspectives. I think the only country repeat as far as like heritage goes that I had was Korea, because both Eunsu Kim and Min Jin Lee were both from Korea. There are so many authors out there, and there are a lot of books that I've put on my TBR from those, and there's the beauty of it. I don't have to wait until next May. So let's talk about what I plan on reading in June. There's no theme for June really, apart from blue or black with foil. So this one is the Doomsday Book by Connie Willis. I've had this one for forever. I just kind of wanted to read it finally. Crunch through some pulpy sci-fi. I'm really excited for this one. Piranesi by Susanna Clark. Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. I splurged for the English edition. The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. And Book of Night by Holly Black, which I'm very stoked for. So yeah, let me know what you read last month. Let me know what you're reading next month. Let me know if reading is done. Don't let me know that. Why would I ask for that? But I hope you're having a lovely, lovely evening, and I will see you all next time.